Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marcelo, and today I will be refuting the claim that the United States should abolish the death penalty. My opponent supported this claim with the following supporting claims. Number one, that the death penalty is too expensive compared to lifetime imprisonment. Number two, that the death penalty fails to deter serious crime. And number three, that the death penalty is biased. Now, for this claim, first of all, the major claim was a proposition of policy, not a claim of fact. And then supporting claims 1 and 3 have issues with their evidence as far as its how true it is. And then supporting claim 2 is fallacious due to ambiguity with its evidence. And I believe that the claim is not accurately and effectively supported. So on to the first supporting claim, that the death penalty is too expensive compared to lifetime imprisonment. My opponent brought forth the evidence that the large amounts of resources are being wasted, but according to deathpenaltyinfo.org, the most common errors were incompetent defense lawyers who failed to look for or recognize important evidence of innocence or mitigating factors, and police or prosecutors who suppressed evidence. Now, as far as the resources being used, these are the same resources that are used in non-capital cases, but it automatically becomes an issue of the judicial process when it's a longer process following a capital case. She also presented the evidence that the median cost of a case seeking the death penalty was nearly 8 times greater than the cost of a case in which the death penalty was not admitted. But again, according to deathpenaltyinfo.org, cases without the death penalty cost $740,000, while cases where the death penalty is sought cost $1.26 million. And if we do the math, the cost of the death penalty is less than double the cost of a case without the death penalty. And on to the second supporting claim, that the death penalty fails to deter serious crimes. My opponent presented the evidence that fear of death is unlikely to deter the worst criminals, and that criminologists doubt that the death penalty is effective. Now, according to theconversation.com, which was the source that the opponent used, there is not the slightest credible statistical evidence that capital punishment reduces the rate of homicide, just like there is no evidence that proves the death penalty is deterrent of crime. There is no solid evidence that proves that the death penalty is not effective. Therefore, we cannot conclude that the death penalty fails to deter serious crimes. Just like the ice cream sales and drowning rate coincidence that exists, there cannot be a cause and effect relationship created between the death penalty and crime rate. And on to the third supporting claim, that the death penalty is biased. My opponent presented the evidence that jurors are 3 times more likely to recommend a death sentence for a black defendant than for a white defendant. But according to deathpenaltyinfo.org, currently there are 42.03 white defendants under death row in the US and 41.67 black defendants. So they are roughly equal. But when looking at the race of defendants executed in the US since 1976, 55.6% have been white, while only 34.5% have been black. Therefore, the information provided by the opponent can be understood as false, and there are about the same number of white and black defendants. About the same number of white and black death penalty defendants, and there have been 21% more executions of white defendants compared to black defendants. In conclusion, we can say that the claim the United States should abolish the death penalty is not accurately and effectively supported. Thank you.
right. As we've had in the past couple of days, people are being pretty good about the organizational issues. Hopefully, you'll be able to stay that effective in the debates when we get to them. So I think you're doing a good job here also. The argument about the first point concerning the expense, your argument basically comes down to death penalty cases only cost twice as much as non-death penalty cases, which still seems to concede that there is an additional expense. Your arguments suggest, though, that the real reason that those costs are high is because of the problems with the representation that they have, or that there's police abuse or prosecutorial abuse that goes on in these cases, and that's the real source of the increased cost, not the death penalty itself. So I think you've mitigated the argument to some degree, but I'm not exactly sure that you've shown that the problem would be solved or would continue regardless of whether or not we had the death penalty. One of the things that you do have suggested here that you don't quite say is that that people who have been prosecuted for these cases, they benefit from the extra attention that comes from the capital cases, which means that they're more likely to be protected if they are unjustly accused, or if there is police or prosecutorial misconduct, that's going to get more scrutiny as a result. If we didn't have these capital cases, the likelihood of scrutiny would probably go down, which seems to suggest a justification for having these in these especially egregious circumstances. So I think you missed the chance to get a little bit extra out of that argument. On the deterrence argument, basically it comes down to we can't tell either way whether it has an effect. So you're in essence saying they can't disprove that it has an effect, and you're going to concede that you can't prove that it doesn't have an effect. I'm not sure that that's the best strategy. I think that there are lots of arguments that might be suggestive to illustrate some basis for deterrence. But if you want to mitigate the issue entirely, I guess, using their own evidence to say we have no way of concluding one way or the other, that's okay. I just think that you are missing an opportunity to maybe strengthen your argument a little bit. On the bias issue, I've got some statistical information that suggests that there's less bias than might be expected based on the ratio of whites and blacks who are serving sentences waiting for execution and those who have actually been executed. I can appreciate that. The actual execution, for instance, that suggests that there is a disparity that goes in the opposite direction of what the advocate is talking about. The one thing that I think would be the obvious response from the advocate were this a debate is that that 42% convicted were white and 41% were black would make perfect sense if 41% of the population were black. But since only 10% of the population is black, it seems that they are overrepresented in the death on death row. That, I think, might be the answer that you get on that particular point. So maybe a little bit more depth would be helpful there. I think you do an effective job presenting your argument. You look at us for the most part. You seem to understand the points that you're making, and you speak pretty confidently. All right. Thank you.